So I'm Crystal, and I'm gonna try to sit here and it might not work. So I'm the principal investigator for the ELLA study, and we recently had a second principal investigator come on, Emily Lund, who's based in Texas Christian University. So just a little bit about my background. I have an undergraduate degree in early childhood development, so just general child development, and was focused on early childhood education until I did my first teaching practicum in the classroom. And I am thankful that there are people who want to be classroom teachers, because it was not for me. But my advisor recommended that I look into speech-language pathology, so I did, and never looked back. So I have a master's in speech pathology from Vanderbilt and did a concentration in interdisciplinary assessment and treatment of children with hearing loss. So we were trained the speech-language pathology program, audiology, and deaf education. We all took courses together and did practicum and volunteer experiences and things like that. And I stayed at Vanderbilt for my PhD and for my postdoc, and I did my postdoc actually in audiology, so in an audiology lab, and learned a lot about audiology that I didn't know before. So I have always been interested in reading and reading outcomes, and was originally interested in early language and literacy, and then thinking about how it affects long-term growth. So we have now a longitudinal study that this is our, would you say, fifth year? I think it's our fifth year of this, maybe the fourth year of the study. I think two of them overlapped. So we have entered the realm of longitudinal studies, which is
that's awesome.
which is awesome and challenging. So, but we have some really interesting findings from the first phase of the study. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And then Brittany will be talking about our summer camps, which we just finished our first round of them this summer for our children after they finish first grade. They start coming to summer camps. So, and Brittany's our lead speech-language pathologist on the project. So this is the blue squares there are reading grade levels of children with hearing loss in the 1970s. So if you look at the y-axis there, that's the grade level from 0 to 8. And then across the x-axis, we've got the age from about second and third graders, 8, 9-year-olds, all the way to 18, so where we would expect high school graduation to happen. So you can see that at age 18 in the 1970s, the outcome was about a third grade reading level. The next set of data that is available is from 2003, which is a long time ago, but folks haven't published anything since then. So how many people think that the outcomes would be lower in 2003? Nobody ever thinks that. What about the same? Higher?
Hoping it would be higher.
How much higher do you think? So third grade in the 1970s. Since then we have FDA approval for cochlear implants in children, lots of hearing aid technology that was not around then.
At least a grade level.
At least a grade level?
At least a grade level.
Anyone else brave? No? Okay. So in 2003, the reading outcomes were pretty much exactly the same. So that is not awesome. We have cochlear implants, we have much better hearing aid technology. We did see increases in things like speech perception and language outcomes, but we haven't seen that transfer over to reading and writing. So that's what I'm really interested in, is figuring out how we can change this. But it's not the case that all children with hearing loss have these low literacy outcomes. So this is data from one of the studies in my lab, and each of the diamonds is an individual child. And there are standard scores on the y-axis here. So you can see that for both reading and spelling, it's about a third of the children who are falling below the average range. And we consider the average range 1 standard deviation, which is not always what school systems and other kinds of providers would consider, but that's our definition of average. So it's not that all children with hearing loss are having a lot of difficulty with literacy acquisition, but there's definitely a really large subgroup. And so we know some do quite well and others don't do well at all. So very low, isn't it? So the goal of our current work in the ELLA project is to identify early on, we're starting at age 4, because starting earlier than that seemed very difficult to find children who had been identified, particularly in South Carolina, where we have a very late identification typically. But if we can figure out early on if there are early predictors in terms of certain skills that you might be lower in terms of skills that you might have slower growth rates than we would expect, who will go on to be a good reader and who will go on to struggle with reading, then we might be able to identify areas where we can intervene in preschool, or areas where the interventions might need to be different for some of our children. So in the ELLA project, we look at emergent literacy skills and we broadly classify them in these 3 categories. So oral language, which is things like vocabulary and grammar; phonological processing, which is phonological awareness, so being able to analyze what sounds are in a word; phonological memory, being able to hold those sounds in your short-term memory; and then phonological recoding, which is being able to pull sound-based information from your long-term memory. Those 3 things there. And then with print knowledge, we're interested in alphabet knowledge and also concepts of print, so knowing how books work, that text represents the things that we're saying, and those sorts of skills. And then, so today I'll be talking about syntax or grammar, specifically for oral language, phonological awareness, and then print and written word concepts, because these are the 3 areas that we found that children with hearing loss have particular difficulty with across the preschool years. And by particular, I should specify, by particular difficulty, we are seeing either I'll show you, but not just a delay, but in some way that the growth is different. So perhaps they start in similar spots. Children with normal hearing have some growth and children with hearing loss have less. And then sometimes where they start behind and have different kind of trajectories.
Are you seeing any kind of consistency with children with hearing aids versus cochlear implants? Do they kind of trend as like a cochlear implant kind of trend a certain way versus
so implant? That's what we're doing now.
Okay.
And we've just started. So so in a couple of slides, I'll talk about this data set. So this data is from our phase 1, where we had 30 children with hearing loss and 30 who have normal hearing. And now we're up to, is it 85 children with hearing loss now? So we're recruiting enough where we can look at that difference between implants and hearing aids, but we aren't able to do it yet. My suspicion is that we will find differences. Any other questions? So this is the way we conceptualize the reading process, and we conceptualize that this process is likely similar for children with normal hearing and children with hearing loss, because the task is always reading English that's in written form. So the things that help you be very efficient at doing that would presumably be the same if you have hearing loss or not. So let's see if I can. So the word decoding and the reading comprehension in green here are the 2 reading skills that we think about. So word decoding is things like sounding out words, knowing sight words, those kinds of skills, and then comprehension is understanding what you read. So here we've got our phonological awareness, our print knowledge, and oral language in purple. So those are emergent literacy skills. And we hypothesize that phonological awareness and print knowledge both directly affect word decoding, but you also have to make the connection between between. So you have to learn about sounds and words. You also have to learn about how those sounds are represented with letters. And then oral language plays, we think, a small role for this decoding piece. So words are easier to decode if you know that it's a real word, so if you have that vocabulary knowledge. But we really think oral language starts to play a bigger role in reading comprehension or understanding what you read. So this is the first phase of the ELA project. And we had 30 children with hearing loss, 30 children with normal hearing. And we enroll typically during the 4-year-old year. We travel all across the country, as you can tell. So children with hearing loss at age 4 are hard to find a lot of, and then who are interested in participating in research. So we are a little flexible, and we enroll most of the time up to age 5. So would you say that's accurate? So to be in the study, you have to have bilateral hearing loss, use amplification on at least one ear, it doesn't have to be both, develop spoken English, and not have additional diagnoses that we know affect language or cognition, so you couldn't have a diagnosis of Down syndrome or autism to be in the study. And this is our timeline. So we see our participants every 6 months, starting at age 4, and then 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6. And every time we see a child, we have a large battery of oral language, phonological processing, and print knowledge tests. And then when they turn 6, typically our folks are in kindergarten at age 6, we also assess initial reading and spelling at that point. So as I talk about the findings, I'll just stay in this sort of framework that we've been talking about. So the first oral language skill that we've looked at is morphosyntax. And morphosyntax is things like marking past tense or different verb tenses. We measure past tense and third person singular. So in this task, I would say, here the girl is kicking a ball. Now she's done, tell me what she did. And the child would hopefully say something like she kicked the ball. So that's what we're looking for, marking the past tense. We also look at irregular past tense. So there's one where a boy is making a birdhouse and he made the birdhouse. And then the second way we measure the morphosyntax is for third person singular. We have pictures of folks doing jobs. And I say, this is a pilot, tell me what a pilot does. And the target response there would be she flies the plane or she lands the plane. So for skills like that, first let me orient here. So the green in each of these graphs is always going to be children with hearing loss. The blue is always going to be children with normal hearing. So here you can see at age 4, there's a really substantial gap. Very substantial. So we've got about 20% accurate compared to about 70% accurate for the children with normal hearing. But what we do see is that the children with hearing loss make more growth over the course of the year. And then by age 5, they've closed the gap quite a bit, but there's still a really substantial gap. So they're at about 50% correct here, and the children with normal hearing are at about 90%, and that's what we would expect at age 5 in the population. So morphosyntax is an area that we think is one that we should really focus a lot on as professionals. And I should say also that you can't do this measure unless, so there's a pre-test that has words that have the D and the S sounds in them. So if you don't produce those sounds at the end of the word, you can't do this task. So these are only, and we have a few up here too. So these are only children who do have those and in final position of words. So this is not a function of final consonant deletion or speech errors so much. Okay. The other thing that we're interested in terms of syntax is complex syntax. So morphosyntax is considered a really early developing skill. Complex syntax is generally considered more later developing, but we we see complex syntax emerging in the 4-year-old here too, which is pretty interesting. So this is a simple sentence. The dog chased the squirrel. And we know it's simple because it just has the one verb phrase here. And to be complex syntax, we define it as any sentence that's got more than one verb phrase. So all of these are complex down here. So the dog chased the squirrel, that's our first one. When she went outside, I wrote these while I was watching my dog chase the squirrel. Forgot I did that. So I got two verbs here, so that's complex. The dog chased the squirrel and the squirrel won. I saw the dog chase the squirrel, and he wants the dog to chase the squirrel. So each of these would be complex. And complex syntax is important because that's one of the major predictors of reading comprehension down the road. So all of these, all of these sentences have similar words, but the meaning is quite different. So understanding those syntax elements here. So the dog chased the squirrel, oh, she didn't when she went outside, is really different from I saw the dog chase the squirrel, or he wants to chase the squirrel. So we, for this, we elicit language samples. So we have a conversation with the child for 12 minutes. And then we code for how many of their utterances contain this complex syntax. And then we calculate a density score. So we count the number of complex syntax elements across the sample and divide it by the total number of sentences the child used. So what you can see here is that the children with normal hearing, this is at age 4, are using quite a bit more complex syntax than the children with hearing loss. And we identified 3 particular types of syntax that there were substantial differences. So the first is simple infinitives, and that's I like to read. Full propositional complements, I think he is hungry. So it's when you have a mental kind of verb, and then a clause that, so you could insert that or if right here. And then subject relative clauses, sorry, that one got cut off. But the girl who ran the race is tired. So the girl ran the race. So it's a subject relative. So now we move on to phonological processing, talk about phonological awareness. So this is our task for phonological awareness. So we say, here's a bike. Let's find a word that starts with the same sound as bike. Box, top, ball. Is it bike fox, bike top, or bike ball? And then the child's task is to pick which of the words starts with the same sound as the target. And what we see here is that at age 4, we're not really seeing very much of a difference. And both of the groups are performing pretty close to the chance level of selecting just randomly. Yes?
The question, when you test the children, do you provide the word or do they? So bike, do you say?
We provide the
box?
word.
Okay.
Because they do not always provide the
No,
same word
okay.
that we would provide.
Got it.
So and we provide visual cues too. So we don't hide the facial cues at all in this task. And some of them we do on purpose, but not in this one. So here they are not different. And the children with normal hearing are just barely above chance. The children with hearing loss are right at chance, but it's not really a meaningful difference here yet. But you can see here that they're starting to diverge a bit. And our department moved in May, and our files were packed up for a while, so we're a little bit behind on the scoring. But I've peeked at what we do have for the 5.5 and 6-year-old time points, and they go even further apart. So we'll see once we get the whole sample in if that continues to be true. Wrong button. So this is an area that we know is really difficult for children with hearing loss because it has to do with really fine-tuned analysis of sounds. And even with the best technology we have these days, you don't have perfect access to the sound. So that makes it even more difficult to learn how to analyze the sounds in the words and really play around with them. So this is a skill that phonological awareness I'm really interested in particularly. We've done some intervention studies with children with hearing loss with some success. They improved. They didn't improve as much as I would like for them to improve. So we're working now on developing really particular interventions that take into account a lot of the characteristics that we've observed for children with hearing loss. And we have a YouTube video about that. So if you're interested, I was like, I can't squeeze that into an hour, but I can give you the link to. We in the lab we were like, we're gonna start a YouTube channel. We'll post a video every month, and it takes a long time to make videos. So we posted one in 6 months, but that's the one we posted. So our second one should be coming soon. I think it's just waiting for me to approve it. All right, so phonological awareness, and then So I'm particularly interested in phonological awareness, and we set up this additional study that we do only at one time that we see the children, and they are 5.5 at this point, 4. So this is 5.5, and we know that children with hearing loss, we've known for a long time, phonological awareness is difficult. There are theories about why it's difficult, and they focus on phonological memory, so being able to hold sounds in your short-term memory and then pull them back out quickly and efficiently. And there are a couple of different ideas. So we designed a study to test the two of the ideas that are most prominent. So the first idea is that sounds that occur at the end of the word are difficult because you're only focusing on, we're looking at syllables here, but you're focusing on the first part of the syllable, and then your phonological memory is full and you can't process what happens next. So you're focused on the first. So that's one idea. The other idea is that phonological memory is very difficult for children with hearing loss, and it's just holding more than one sound at a time is very difficult. So not related necessarily to where it occurs, but holding multiple sounds and doing the work to analyze them. So we have these 4 monsters up here. I think they dance in Kina. Is the question?
Yeah, question. Kids with hearing losses, do you typically see memory recall being more difficult than
General memory?
General, yeah.
Oh, we haven't tested that. I can speak to that for children with language impairment, not hearing loss, because I did test that in my dissertation, and there was not a difference. So for general memory skills, so we did, one of the tasks is a piece of paper that has holes in it, and I poke my finger through holes in a certain order, and then the child has to replicate that. So it's really not a language-based task at all, and that was not difficult for them. The phonological memory tasks are very difficult for them. I don't know that it would be exactly the same for
Like it's
hearing
more
loss.
like speech.
I guess so, yeah. So language and speech.
Yeah.
I guess that hasn't been tested here.
Like when they read a very basic story and then they get the story, but very, very basic and simple and not as much detail for hearing.
Well, you go back and you read the same thing over and over again. The recall, does it seem to be there, or is it more and more difficult?
So I'm in the realm of guessing. No, I like to say that when I'm guessing, because sometimes people just answer questions and you're like, oh, and they're like actually guessing. So I'm guessing right now. I think that probably that's a result of phonological memory, would be my guess. So it's not exactly the same kind of thing, but knowing that the skill of holding language sound-based information in memory is really difficult, I think that would definitely transfer to reading as well. And we actually see, this is also language impairment, not hearing loss, but we're developing a screener right now in our lab for older children with language impairment, because we've got so many kids in schools who aren't receiving services, who have language impairment, and we aren't identifying them. So we have a screener that teachers can use very quickly, and it is So it's the morphosyntax that we looked at is a clinical marker of language impairment. So if you are 5 and not marking past tense in your language, really, you probably have language impairment. But as you get into elementary school, children with language impairment gain those skills too. But if we ask you to read passages that have past tense, they start dropping the markers again, even though they're written on the page in front of them. So I think that that might translate a little bit to your question as well. Like when your cognitive system like gets full, things start to drop back off.
Thanks.
That wasn't what you asked at all.
No, that's
Okay, so I made these slides in Keynote, and the monsters used to dance, and I don't know if it will transfer over, but let's see. Okay, so that was Kate, and Kate measures this here. So Kate is in the initial position. It's helpful to know. Kate only eats words that start with K. So Kate would eat cake. She would not eat lime. I don't remember exactly what all Kate eats. We specified to our graphic designer that our monsters needed to be friendly because we originally had not as friendly looking monsters and it was really too scary. So now we have friendly monsters. One of our students' friends designed our monsters for us, which is quite lovely. So Kate only eats words that start with K. So she's measuring the initial position of the syllable, and it's just one sound, so just that K. And then next we've got Tom, and Tom only eats words that end with M. So he would eat lime, but he wouldn't eat cake. And he is measuring here this final position, but just one sound. Then we've got Blair, who only eats words that start with blah. So she would eat blue, but she wouldn't eat brown. So she's here, she's our blend, so she's in the initial position, but now we've got two sounds that you have to hold in memory. And then last we've got Ned, who only eats words that end with ed. So he would eat bed, but he would not eat couch. Those are not actually the words that we have. There might be a bed. I can't remember. So, but he's the rhyme here. So he's in the final position of the syllable, and he has two sounds. So we had, so we thought the findings could go either way. It could, or lots of ways. But so if the first thing that I talked about, so the fact that things that happen at the beginning of the syllable are more salient, you hold those in memory, and then you just sort of miss what's happening at the end, then we would expect that children with hearing loss perform better on these two, the initial sounds and the blends that are happening at the first part of the syllable, than the final pieces here. If we think that the folks who say, oh, well, it's the number of sounds that we're asking you to hold in your phonological memory and then analyze, then we would expect children with hearing loss to perform better here on the one sound tasks than the ones that we're asking them to think about two sounds at once. And what we found was super interesting. Maybe we'll see it. There we go. So again, the children with hearing loss are green, the children with normal hearing are blue. And for children with normal hearing, what we found was that, in fact, they are best at the tasks that happen at the beginning of the syllable. So they're better at initial sound and blends than they are at final sound and rhymes. But for children with hearing loss, they were better at the ones where they're only being asked to think about and analyze one sound, regardless of where it occurred in the word, than they were on the ones where we're asking them to think about two sounds. So all of that was a very long explanation to say that when we're
Just on that though, it looks like, and I understand what you're saying, but as far as like the rhyme, it looks like there's still a smaller gap though when it comes to the comprehension or ability.
Yeah.
So would we still say just because those other two are higher, is that, but the gap is bigger, does that still?
Yeah, so here we're just, so maybe this would be better displayed on two separate graphs. So we're not looking at the comparison necessarily. So
We're just
we,
only looking at what they're.
within the group, the patterns that
Okay,
they're having.
gotcha.
So all of these differences are significant here. So we know that children with hearing loss are performing lower across the board.
Yeah.
And they also seem to have this different pattern too.
I just thought it was interesting that the final sound in the rhyme, though, there's a much closer,
Yeah.
you know, equivalency with hearing and without hearing.
So I think that that's really interesting too. I'm gonna think about that while I talk. So what we're thinking is, as I think about phonological awareness intervention, we have traditionally taken interventions that are developed for children with normal hearing and use them with children with hearing loss. But it seems like there's a different developmental sort of progression, and perhaps the interventions that we've been using aren't appropriately taking into account this difference in development. So that's something that we are designing an intervention for now. All right, and then our last category is print knowledge. So in this task, in the conceptual print knowledge, we have two books. This is an example of one of the books. It's 9Dex9, and it's out of print, and it's very expensive when you have to buy new copies now. It's very expensive for a children's book. You can, Amazon has the like huge book copies, but they don't let you carry those on the airplane, so they like don't fit in the allotted size of carry-on luggage. And Bernie would kill me if we started carrying around this. So in this task, we embed questions about the print while we read this book together. So on this page, I would first say, where should I start to read? And the answer is here. And if they get it, then we say, oh yes, that's right. Then which way do we go? And then we expect tracking along this first line. And then if they don't get the first one, we would say, this is where I start to read, then which way should I go? So we're embedding the questions about like, what do you know about print and how reading works and how books work while we read the story. And you could probably recite it now. So what we see is very similar to phonological awareness. So in this one, I have looked out, so this is 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6. So I have looked out in time, because I'm interested in this too, and we just wrote a grant, so I was like, we'll just analyze what we have. So we see the same thing, where there's no difference at age 4, but then over the course of preschool, children with normal hearing here make gains like this. Children with hearing loss make gains as well, but they seem like they have a little bit of a different pattern, where there's a big jump between age 5 and 5.5. And by age 6, there's still a substantial gap here. So this is another area where we're trying to think outside the box in terms of the kinds of intervention that we do. And we're actually, I have a slide for that. So this is the other book that's used in that, it's Spot Bakes a Cake. And in it, you ask things like, where's the space between two words? Where are the big words? Where are the little words? How many words does the mouse say? Things like that. So this is data from Emily Lund, who's our Texas-based PI. And she asked parents to complete a parent rating scale of what words your child understands up to the first 100 words. So the children with typical hearing, the children with cochlear implants, everyone has 100 words at this point. And in the makeup of the first 100 words, this is concept words that we're interested in. So things like first, when, next, where, so spatial concepts, temporal concepts, and quantity concepts, how many. Children with typical hearing have on average about 15 in their first 100 words. Understand, children with cochlear implants are at about 2. We're seeing a big difference in concept vocabulary knowledge here. And when we look back at our measure, so the PWPA is this measure and with the duck book, what we see is that the difference in performance that we're seeing is really driven by the questions that have these concept vocabulary in them. When there's not a concept vocabulary, the performance is pretty similar. So the grant we have right now that's, I think it's already been reviewed, so I think happy thoughts. But so thinking about combining instruction about print, so pointing out the different components of print in a book. Here's a title, that's what a title means, with embedded direct instruction of these concept vocabulary words. So that's where we're going for print knowledge. Oh, and then this is a paper, it says under review, but that is a lie because it actually just came out in Deaf Studies and Deaf Education. So this is, you can still see, this is Gabby, and she's a doc student in the lab. And for her first project as a doc student, she analyzed our home literacy questionnaire that we asked parents to fill out. And what she found is that when we ask how many hours a week do you read with your child, what age did you start reading with your child, and how many books do you read each time you sit down to read, there's no difference between what parents of children with hearing loss and parents of children with normal hearing report. So book reading practices seem to be very similar in terms of these kinds of concepts. Where we see differences is with the children's interaction with the books. So these are things like, does your child ask to read? When you're reading, does your child ask what words mean? So it's really a measure of engagement, the children's engagement in the book reading. So we see significant differences between the two groups in this measure. And we also see that this metric of the child's interaction is related to early literacy skills in oral language, in phonological processing, and in print knowledge. So we're thinking about ways in terms of this finding of parents are doing what we're asking them to do. They're reading with their child. They're doing it at similar levels that we see for children with normal hearing. But how can we make the book reading more enjoyable for the children? How can we engage them in that more? So that's something that we have just begun to think about, and I would take any kinds of ideas that folks have.
I'm just curious, do you think there's any value in just doing it one-on-one or like one parent with the child, or making it like more of a family activity where it's both, like, I mean, we have 2 kids, so, you know, I just don't, it can be a little harder to manage if you're trying to read a book to 2 kids, but I'm wondering if that interplay might have more.
Yeah, I
impact?
think that's something I would definitely try. So I have a niece and a nephew. My nephew is 4 months old, but my niece has decided that she needs to read to him. She's 2. She doesn't actually know how to read. She doesn't have that much language. But they read books together a lot, and they're like very engaged in that activity together. So I think that's a great idea to try.
Yeah, because sometimes when you're doing something with the parent, it might seem like this is less play, more of like, I'm asking you to work. So I'm wondering if having the other child makes it seem more like an activity that's fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
We have a little different scenario, but my daughter is 7 and she has cochlear implants and also is visually impaired, but has pretty awesome functional vision. But we use a flashlight, so we turn the light off.
Oh, that's really fun.
That's what I do with her a lot. And she really is then everything around her, and then she thinks it's fun, you know, but it makes your attention stay on the page and, you know, stuff.
Yeah.
Is it an overhead lamp or a flashlight? Like you're holding a flashlight?
Oh, is it like a Pixar? That would be so fun. We should write all these down.
I'm gonna try that because my kids love flashlights.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
With all the advanced phonics is just put into baby needs and all the research and stuff that's come with that. I get to work with toddlers at Desert Voices, and there's a window there in that toddlerhood, depending on what language the kids come in toddler with, where like you're getting them to learn to sit with you, but then there's a gap between they learn to sit with you and they want to be like interacting with you, between that and the fact that they can actually start to get something out of the story and the concepts you're doing, right? And so within that, you're wanting them to like mimic and understand emotions that you're doing and all of that. But I'm pretty excited to start playing more and more with baby beats during that window. Because even in like the past couple of days of playing with adding in music and adding in beats to the story and using it kind of in a anticipatory thing, the kids were following along with that. And some of them surprised me with even how much more they were willing to kind of come out of their shell and imitate by adding in like the baby beat piece of it. That I would be super curious as
If
you're doing
adding
more
research,
research
yeah.
when you add the music into the interactions when music already has the complexity of music already like puts things into place for me anyways.
And a lot of the children's books we use have
Musical element.
music anyway.
Yeah.
Like
So
my all-time favorite is We're Going on a Bear Hunt.
yeah.
So
I
when
own
you
a
say
lot
that,
of
you're like,
copies
is
of
it like
that.
Wheels on the Bus, so there's like a singing
Yeah.
component versus there's
Mhm.
actually like a little button that has an audio sound?
Oh, you know, I think you could go either way with that. So my
But it does
2-year-old
seem like
niece,
with there is like a song or some musical component to the, like a sing-along song or
Yeah,
story. a
I
little bit.
think, so this is, again, just like my thinking, not something that maybe people have studied and I don't know. But I think that book reading for children with hearing loss is just not that much fun.
Yep.
Like it's a different kind of interaction than with children with normal hearing. And it's something that as professionals, we say, you should read with your child, you should read with your child. So as parents, folks like read with their kids, whether the kids like it or not. So I think that like the emotion of reading is perhaps different. So when we can embed other kinds of elements that make it less like reading and more like something else they would want to do, that could be helpful.
That's our biggest challenge right now.
Yes.
So in your study, the subject base of the Cook It or Plant children, where did you pull those from? Are they from, and what background do they have? Like, are they public schools? Are they privately trained?
Everything.
It's all over the board.
It's all over the board. And we're collecting, we ask the parents that sort of thing. So that's something that we would, if we can figure out how to standardize it in any meaningful way, we would like to look at it. So we have partnerships with a lot of, do we still call them option schools? So with a lot of option schools all across the country. And I think we have at least one option school in every region of the country. Would you say that's true? And we also have a lot of kids who are in their public school, preschools, like a self-contained kind of classroom. Some kids are in general education from the very beginning. So we have a wide variety, and we ask that of the parents. So
Have you pulled that subject base apart and actually looked at what the difference between private and public?
we haven't.
I'm just
We're
curious to see if
recording
there's any
this, so I'm
deviation.
gonna say again, I'm guessing. This is just based on, like, I've tested a lot of the kids. I would say for the most part, the ones who are in private schools with teachers who are specially trained to work with children with hearing loss are doing the best.
So the some of these kids with
I'm not saying
hearing
that
loss,
because I know a lot of you guys are in the room.
But-
It's like actually true.
but some of these children with hearing loss, they could just be not at a private school. They could be at just any.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So especially, we have a lot of families who live in rural areas, which is super cool. And with the power of social media for recruitment, we have families that we wouldn't have found otherwise. Most of the children in this data set are, we recruited through schools for children with hearing loss. We recruited through audiologists, and we recruited through speech and language clinics. So we were really in this set only catching kids who were in services somewhere, because that's how we recruited. And then we said, you know what? We see a lot of kids, like I've seen a lot of kids clinically who aren't doing as well as most of the kids in our study are doing. So we opened the recruitment and we stopped recruiting through those places primarily and really tried to recruit through social media in parent support groups. So I think we're catching a broader range of education placements now.
And how long is your time with the child each? Is it like, because attention spans are what they are, so is it an hour or is it a
It's
whole
about
day
2
activity?
hours, an hour and a half. It depends on who's doing it. Brittany's pretty fast these days. I think I'm
And
probably
it's just
the
one
fastest.
time, or is it over a few days over the course of a week?
So the very first time we see a child, we typically break it into 2 days, unless some kind of schedule doesn't allow for that. And those 2 days, typically one is about an hour and a half and one is an hour for a typical session. Sometimes they're much longer and sometimes they're shorter. And then I forgot about that. So, am I doing okay on? Is it okay if we go over an hour? We're never gonna have an hour of things to talk about when I start talking. Here we go. Okay. So this time we typically do 2 sessions. It's because we have an extra small set of measures that we just give the first time to sort of get a baseline. And then each of these middle times, so 4.5, 5, 5.5, an hour and a half to 2 hours, just one session. And then at age 6, an hour and a half to 2 hours for that session with all the same measures as here, and then an additional hour and a half or 2 hours of the reading and spelling.
And this is something my my son's speech therapist just brought up to us, and I never heard of this. I think it's baby speak. Is that the right terminology? And I guess there are findings that there are kids who are learning baby speak rather than sign language or kind of a more standard LSL have the highest reading comprehension. And I think it's kind of like the way she described it is like the in court when they have the person that's typing, it's kind of like the essence of what's being said, but it's not the actual full.
I've never heard of baby speak.
Okay.
I, as a person that's interested in grammar, I would lean not toward doing that because we know that you'll have some difficulties with grammar, and I want to make sure I'm giving you input that is that follows grammar. Okay. But I don't know, and I haven't seen that research, so I can't really speak.
Yeah, and I'm just hearing about it. I was like, it sounded, I don't know, it's just, who knows?
Yeah. Any other questions? Let's see where we're waiting. Pointing if that's not helpful. Okay, and then this is, so Carson here has not quite graduated. I think they still have a couple more days before the degrees go through. But this is Carson's master's thesis, and this is the first data we have analyzed from our kindergarten time point. So she has 23 children with hearing loss and 21 with normal hearing who have completed that time. And she did lots of fancy analysis of their spelling, initial spelling in kindergarten. This is not her data. This is my data. So these are 3rd to 6th graders with cochlear implants. And what you can see is that in both spelling and reading, we have really large group differences. So these scores, these average scores are in the average range, but they are substantially lower than what we see in our children with normal hearing. So these are 3rd to 6th graders, cochlear implants, primarily spoken language users, some who use sign language as well, and a couple who are in classrooms where sign is used. And this is Carson's data. And what we see in kindergarten is no difference in spelling. So in kindergarten, we're seeing sort of what we see at 4 in some of our emergent literacy skills. We don't see a difference in spelling skills quite yet. So these groups are not different. There's a little bit more variety in the children with normal hearing. So there are a couple kids in that group who are really strong spellers in kindergarten. But for the most part, the groups look pretty similar. So by 3rd to 6th grade, we see this big difference. In kindergarten, it hasn't yet emerged. So we're thinking again about how to start here. And instead of ending here, maintaining this sort of similar performance across elementary and middle school. So we're tracking this every year that we see the children. So we're hoping to identify exactly where do we start to see those differences and perhaps what could we do to support that not happening.
And I think you mentioned earlier that they're trying to, this will eventually become a longitudinal.
Yes.
So when you say that, that just means instead of, hey, we have a set from, 3 to 5 or whatever, it's really going to be, we're going to keep track of these kids until they're in their 20s or whatever to really have
that's our goal.
The data. Okay, gotcha.
If they keep giving us money, we're going to keep doing it.
Okay.
So right now, the kids who have been in the longest, we've seen them 6 times now. So we see them the 5 times in preschool and then that last one in kindergarten, and then they just completed grade 1 and we saw them this summer, and Bernie's gonna talk about our camps. So other findings, and it's really just one. So Bernie has analyzed, so the Joint Committee on Infant Hearing recommends that children are screened by 1 month. So you get a hearing screening by 1 month of age. You get a diagnosis of hearing loss if you have hearing loss by 3 months, and then amplification by 6 months, early intervention. So we looked at that in our sample of children who met that guideline for amplification by 6 months compared to those who don't. And we found that if you meet the 6 months for amplification, 2/3 of that group have language scores above 85, so in the average or above average range. We have quite a number of kids who have really, really high language scores, like in the 130s. And if you don't meet those guidelines, only about 50% are scoring within the average range. So,
I just have a quick question.
yes.
I thought that the FDA doesn't let you do implants before you hear.
So these are hearing aids. So if you get your hearing aid by 6 months. And we ask hearing aid and then cochlear implant. So are those hearing aids providing much amplification? Probably not. But it seems like something about having that input is still those. So maybe it's not the amplification. Maybe it's like you're in a family who is getting all the best services and doing everything that people tell them to do, and that makes a difference. So, but generally, this is what we do. Okay, and then I added this in this afternoon because this morning we were talking about fatigue. So this is again the 3rd to 6th graders with cochlear implants, and we asked the children in this darker gray to report their fatigue, and we asked the parents to report their child's fatigue, and they were not similar at all. So lower scores mean that you're more tired. I don't know why they scored it that way because it's not intuitive. So across the board, the children are reporting being more tired in general fatigue, in sleep and rest habits. So I wake up tired, I have trouble sleeping through the night, I take a lot of naps. And then this difference was not quite significant, but I think that, so this is cognitive fatigue. And I think that parents recognize the cognitive fatigue perhaps more than they do these other things. So perhaps you don't know that your child's waking up a lot in the middle of the night if they aren't alerting you to that fact or telling you about it. Just babysat my niece, and she wakes up a lot, and she just like sits in bed and does her little thing. So if you're not watching, then you don't notice that she's awake. But you can tell the next day.
And if you're a parent, you're hopefully sleeping. Like, don't want any of that happening.
I was babysitting her at my parents' house where they have a pool, and I just panicked the whole time that she was like somehow going to figure out how to unlock the door and get in the pool. So I didn't sleep very much. So the children are reporting being more tired than the parents are reporting for them. And over here, when the child's report of their fatigue is really strongly related to their language scores. So children with hearing loss who are more tired have lower language scores than children who are less tired.
Has there been any research or just thoughts as far as when doing the studies, if just kids seem to be more maybe with it or able to focus earlier in the day than they are later in the day?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was the audiology lab that I did my postdoc in. We were studying fatigue. So I'd never thought of it before, and I was like, wow, this is a huge deal. And people aren't talking now. People are talking more about it now, but at the time, not very much at all. And we purposely made them tired. That was the study design. We designed, it was a 4-hour visit. So these are not preschoolers. These are, although we brought in 6-year-olds, and I was like, you guys, this is not gonna happen. And it didn't work well. It hurt tears. But for older kids, they were able to go through. But we had a 4-hour kind of slate of things that you do. And it was interspersed with measures of fatigue and tasks that we know would make you tired. And I know they make you tired because I was the person that tried them out and was like, I have to go home now. Like, I can't be at work anymore. I'm exhausted. So we, as part of that study, we also brought kids in on Saturday mornings to do language and literacy testing, and they came in after school one day to do language and literacy testing, and we saw significant differences in their scores.
And that the
They're better
morning
in
was,
the morning.
yeah.
Mhm. So, and we've seen a lot of schools sort of move toward having particular kinds of blocks in the morning versus the afternoon. So
Yeah.
a lot of schools now have language arts and mathematics in the morning, and then do like less language intensive social studies and science in the afternoon. But social studies and science is really language heavy because you have to learn all these new words to understand any of the
Yeah,
concepts.
it's kind of interesting when you have your kids who are in school and they're probably pooped for the day, but then you still want to also maybe do another speech therapy session after
Mhm.
school. How effective is that really going to be, or is it better for their overall growth maybe to not do it because it gets them to kind of recharge their batteries,
Mhm.
and then they might be better when you do want to do reading later because they've been less.
Because they have a little bit of a break.
Yeah, they're not just kind of getting pounded all the time.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's a really good point too. Any other comments? Okay, I'm on my last 2 slides now. So this is what we're doing now and or next. So we have a study that is very cool, I think, looking at what causes fatigue for children with hearing loss. So the theory that's really out there right now is that it's listening effort. The effort that it takes to pick out the teacher's voice from all the classroom noise, it makes you really tired. But what we never published from that study, and I'm interested in language impairment also in children with normal hearing. So we had a small group of children with language impairment but normal hearing, and their fatigue scores look just like the kids with hearing loss. So, and they don't have hearing loss. So I think that, listening effort is clearly a cause of fatigue. We all know that too. If we're trying to listen to something in noise, it's much more tiring. But I think that trying to understand the message is a big cause of cognitive fatigue as well. So we've set up a study where we sent out a survey to middle school teachers about people who are really cool, historical people who are really cool, but kids don't really know about them. So, and then we selected the ones that the teachers rated as the lowest likelihood that their students would know anything about these people. And then we had to throw out Henrietta Lacks because Oprah came out with a movie about her. So now the kids probably know about her. But she was cool, and it was, as we researched her more, it was not exactly middle school appropriate material. So we got rid of her. But we have folks like the first African American PhD graduate from Harvard, and the doctor who discovered that washing your hands in between autopsy and delivery saved a lot of babies' lives. And so just really interesting people. And he was not a super nice person, so nobody believed him. So teaching some life lessons too. You can discover really important things, but if you're not nice, people won't listen to you. So, and we're setting it up so for each of the people, we have a simulated classroom activity that has simple language versus complex language. And in some you listen in quiet, and in some you have background noise, where we simulated classroom levels of noise. So we're starting data collection, hopefully, when the students get back. Lots of intervention studies, so the ones that I talked about as we went. We've been, this summer we started interviewing parents about their journeys, and that's been really cool. We haven't officially analyzed the data yet, but I've done some trainings on qualitative interview kind of data, and just my impressions from the interviews that I've done or have listened to already is that that first professional that you encounter after failing the newborn hearing screening is really a pivotal moment for families. So when that professional has been someone that they connect with and who knows about pediatric hearing loss, those families tend to have really good journeys. And when that professional is especially for our rural families. So the audiologists are generally not specialists, they're generalists and have less experience with children who are infants, and the testing and the services available in the area are certainly, there's not a specialist for hearing loss in some of these towns that have 300 people. So that results in a really different kind of journey. So that first professional encounter really seems to be really important. One of the things that we've started looking at in our elementary school is we're having parents fill out risk rating scales for things like ADHD and autism. So those are two diagnoses that are reported to be very high for children with hearing loss, and we aren't so sure that it's actually that you have both of those things so much as perhaps the hearing loss has some of the same symptoms, and then the treatment is likely different. So like if the attention symptoms that you have are not a cause of ADHD and we put you on medication and then changes your brain's chemistry, but it's actually a result of hearing loss and not your brain's chemistry, like that's probably not good. So that's something that we're really interested in. And then we also have a study where we've looked at children who have dyslexia. So these are kids who are not diagnosed with hearing loss at all, never failed a hearing screening at school, nothing. I should say in South Carolina, hearing screenings don't happen all that often in schools. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's true. So we went into a private school that we do a lot of work with, and it was a new principal that year. He has a lot of experience with dyslexia, and I came in and was like, there are way too many kids who are struggling readers in this school. So asked us to do an intervention. So I had some students who came out, they did a clinic experience doing intervention at this school. We did hearing screenings and the pre-testing because I study hearing loss and we always do hearing screenings for everything. And half of them failed, half of them. So we followed it up with a study where we did hearing testing in the sound booth with the kids, and we saw the same thing. So kids who have reading impairment, mostly dyslexia, 52% failed the hearing screening compared to 20% of kids who did not have dyslexia, and 20% is about the fail rate you would expect. So Gabby, my doc student, just got a grant for her dissertation. She is going to study phonological awareness intervention, if we're interested in that, with FM systems, personal FM systems for kids with dyslexia. And then the Ella study, that's our big one. So in phase 2, we added Emily, who's really interested in word learning and semantic knowledge and vocabulary. So thinking a lot about how this early vocabulary knowledge really underlies a lot of the emergent literacy skills that we look at. We'll have 90 children with hearing loss. That's what we told NIH. We're aiming to have more like 100 because our recruitment went really so shockingly well this year, and we're at 85 right now. So we'll have 45 with hearing aids, 45 with cochlear implants, so we'll get to do a lot of those comparisons now. And 45 with normal hearing, we actually have 60.
Can you only do it if you have the same number for each classification?
No, so we're actually really close. We have, I think, 44 hearing aids and 41 cochlear implants. And we didn't try, really. We were just like, we'll take anyone now, and it's been pretty evenly divided. But there are like some statistical fancy things you can do to correct for different sizes if we end up like that. And then we over-recruited here as well because in our first phase, more of our children with normal hearing dropped out of the study because it's a lot, and I think there's not as much perceived benefit for them. So this is a map almost of where I keep forgetting to update it, and then I stopped bringing my iPad on the plane because it's heavy. So we have we've got kids in Maine, we have kids in New Jersey and Alabama as well. Are there any other ones? I don't think we have other ones. So we're in 35 of the states. We're in talks with the Hawaii Department of Education, but we don't know if that will go.
He's excited about it.
Yeah. Well, and they specified that they wanted certified SLPs to do the testing so that they could use it for their official testing too. And we were like, sorry, students will be handling testing. But we don't know if that will happen, or if it will happen before we
Yeah, they
max
can go
out.
to Alaska.
Well, we were thinking about Alaska, but then I went to Idaho in January, and it was very scary. I grew up here, and now I live here, and we do not know how to drive in the snow. So I actually flew into Wyoming and then tried to drive over mountains to Idaho, and it took me 3 times to work up the courage to keep going. So then I was like, Alaska might not be the place for me. So yeah, so we would love to fill in the map. You guys are filled in, obviously, but if you know people in other places.
There's a AG Bell chapter in Alaska. I could put you in touch with.
Pretty controlled. Oh, I should have said also, I don't know if I should disclose this. I'm a board member for South Carolina AG Bell. I don't know if it's disclosed, but just say that too. Okay. And then now our study timeline for these new folks who are enrolling, they start at age 4. They do exactly the same thing that we did in the first phase. And then the summer after each grade, we have a summer camp where we bring kids in. And I'm not going to tell you too much about that because Brittany's going to. So we have money right now for our newly enrolled folks in this grant to follow them through grade 3. If you were in the old study, if you're in phase 1, we actually will be following those folks to grade 5. And we're hoping to continue. So our next goal is to get a grant to follow through middle school and then through high school and then through post-secondary choices. Okay, so this is, these are just some of our lab people, and I'll let Brittany come talk about the summer camp now.
Okay. So my name is Brittany Gray. I am the lead speech language pathologist on the Ellis study. I did my undergraduate degree at the Loyola University of Maryland and my graduate degree at the University of Pittsburgh. And I was sick of cold weather, so I moved to Charlotte, and that's where I currently live. I was a clinical-based SLP for about 10 years, and then I decided I wanted to be on the other end of it, so I got into research. So that's how I got involved with working with Crystal. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our summer camps. So for the first 5 testing sessions, we come to the children. So wherever they are in the U.S., we come to them. Yeah, we do have one in Canada too. But then after their first grade year, we have the summer camp. So what is the Ella Summer Camp? It's a 2-day event that incorporates both our assessments that we do for the Ella study as well as a social activity. So for half of each day, the participants in the Ella study will complete the testing, and then the other half will go to the social activity, and then the same thing for the next day. So what is included in the testing? The grade level Ella testing involves assessments in 6 areas: oral language, phonological processing, print knowledge, reading, writing, and we also do a series of audiology assessments. So oral language tests, those are your grammar. They'll look at, we look at grammar in target word forms, like as Crystal mentioned, marking the ED for past tense words. We also look at the children's vocabulary as well as their ability to formulate grammatically correct sentences. Some of the phonological processing assessments examine one understanding of sounds in words, such as rhyming, or the ability to identify words that start with the same sound. Print knowledge activities evaluate one's knowledge of concepts related to written text, such as understanding letters versus words, or knowing where to locate the author on the cover page, or where to begin reading. And then for our reading measures, we look at one's ability to decode unknown words, to read fluently, as well as to comprehend written text. And then our writing tasks involve composing stories with the beginning, middle, and ending, while also looking at grammar and punctuation. And then we also do a series of audiological assessments, such as pure tone audiometry, speech audiometry, and sound field aided and speech aided assessments. So what is a social activity? This is the first summer that we did the Ella Camp. So this year, the Ella kids spent half of a day at the zoo and then half of a day at a children's museum. And then on the last day of camp, we also had them go to a minor league baseball game. So our social activities may change depending on the location of the camps and the availability of places and events at that time. So what does the itinerary look like? So our campers arrive the day before, and then we divide the campers into two groups. So we have group A and we have group B. So group A would go to the clinic for testing, while group B is going to the social activity. Then they meet back together for lunch. So everybody's there at the same time for lunch, and then they switch. So group A would then go to the social activity, and group B would do the Ella testing, and then we all meet back again for dinner. And then the second day, the groups switch. So group A, who initially went to the clinic first, is now going to the social activity first, while group B is doing the Ella testing, again, meeting back for lunch, and then they switch. And then again, meeting back for dinner, and this year we had dinner on the second day at the baseball game. And then the campers leave the following day.
Can you participate in this summer camp without participating in the other study, or it's all inclusive?
We prefer it to be all inclusive, that we start with you start with the first part of the study, and then once your child finishes their first grade year, that's when the summer camp starts.
Okay.
So who participates in the Ella summer camp? After a child, as I just said, a child that's enrolled in the Ella study begins to participate after he or she completes their first grade year. So then they attend the summer camp every year through the summer after their third grade year right now, which is all we have funding for. And then each Ella participant is able to bring one parent or guardian with them to the camp. So when are they? They're 2 consecutive days in the summer. Again, the campers and the parents arrive the day before, and then they leave the day after the camp. Where are the Ella summer camps? So this year we had a total of 5 summer camps. 4 of them were in Columbia, mainly because that's where, as Crystal talked about, where our initial set of participants, most of them were more local. We also had one in Chicago this year. We have a lot of kids in the Texas area, so next year we're planning on adding 2 summer camps in Texas. And we're open to where our summer camps will be in the future based on where we have participants, where we can get facilities that are willing to work with us. So maybe Phoenix. We're open to it. What expenses does the Ella study cover? We cover all travel fees. We cover all hotel expenses, tickets to the activities, and food for the Ella participant and one parent or guardian. Most of the things we were able to pay for up front, so we didn't have too many out-of-pocket expenses for the participants, except things like baggage, if they check baggage on their flights, or airport parking. We just weren't able to, but we reimbursed them for it. So really, it's no out-of-pocket cost to the parents. And if they drive, we get reimbursed for mileage. What does my child get for participating? In addition to having an awesome experience, we also give a $50 gift card for each time that they come. And we provide a parent report with scores from each of the testing sessions. So, yeah. And what do parents and other family members do while the Ella camper is testing? Our testing sessions last anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours at the elementary age. So we do ask our parents of children with hearing loss if they would be willing to voluntarily participate in a parent interview. So some of our parents do that. We also have the paperwork that you have to complete and update. And then we have a bunch of games and puzzles, especially if there happen to be siblings that are waiting in the waiting room. So we provide all of that. And then last, I just have a couple pictures from this year. And everybody signed a photographic release, just so you know. We have permission for all these pictures. But here's some pictures at the zoo for some of our kids. And then the Children's Museum that we went to. The baseball game. In the hotel, we were able to get some pictures there. And our hotel had a pool, which our kids absolutely loved. Yeah, so if anyone is interested in participating or knows somebody who's interested or wants to find out more information about the Ella study, we have a website, ellastudy.org, or you can email us at wll@mailbox.sc.edu. Does anybody have any questions about the camp? No questions? Any questions about the Ella study in general?
Do parents just take naps while they're
Sure.
sitting there?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
The only thing we don't allow is rehearse.
Oh, you don't want full responsibility of the
No.
children?
No, we prefer not to.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we have anybody left on the Zoom meeting, but Chris, can we turn on audio from Zoom so people on the meeting have questions?
I opened up chat for questions and nobody,
Oh, okay.
nobody did, but I can.
But I think we have audio in the room. So Crystal and Brittany, if you guys don't mind coming back up, we'll just open up to questions. I know it's getting late, but if anybody has any questions, we'll just either take them online or in the room.
We've passed we're on Eastern time. So we've like passed our tired and we're like ready to go.
Okay.
If I unmute everybody, it might get really loud right now. Yeah, cool.
All right.
So if anybody has questions, just start talking. Is everybody asleep?
So one of the questions I had for you guys is, so I think there were some great discussions about things to be thinking about, that I could take away today. But when do you think you'll have even more new interventions or kind of things that as a parent I could use with my child?
Yeah, so we have ideas now about what we think intervention should look like. It's a modal. My Appalachian dialect. But they're just ideas right now. And especially for children with hearing loss, because there aren't large concentrations in any one spot to do this large scale intervention research, it really requires that you have grant funding to do that. And grant funding is much harder to get for intervention than for other kinds of things. We can talk about why, but so we have pilot things that we're working on now, and they seem pretty promising. So we have a couple published studies on phonological awareness intervention, and in one of them, a speech pathologist, me, did the intervention one-on-one with the children, and we saw nice gains. In the other, we did an initial 2-hour professional development for the classroom teachers at the preschool, and then they implemented it across the school year. We saw really nice gains for that.
Can you share that with us?
Yes, so I can send you PDFs of those two papers, lecture and research in their spare time. And then the YouTube video that I was talking about is really based on our experiences in those two studies, and then some of our newer work with phonological awareness too, thinking about these are the things perhaps we should be thinking about for children with hearing loss that we haven't thought about traditionally. The other thing we're really interested in is book reading based interventions, so those are really effective for children with normal hearing. We are seeing that parents of children with hearing loss are reading to their children at the same rates that parents of children with normal hearing report doing. The way that affects emergent literacy appears to be a little different. So we're thinking about parent training. Like here's specific ways that you can read books with your child, or here are ways to pick books that might be more engaging. So like ones that have manipulatives, the flaps that you can look up. So I would say in that PWPA task, I can see myself moving now. In the PWPA task, there's one book that's like really, the 9-9 is really a traditional kind of like you read it and turn the page book. The SPOT books are really interactive. They've got the flaps. The kids are way more engaged in the flap books. So thinking about how to select books that might encourage more interaction and particular kinds of behaviors to do during reading. So that's the next one. So we have an initial filming of training modules, and they aren't ready for prime time yet. They need some more work. But that's definitely something that is in the mix. We have a new CF this year. So Brittany's our lead SLP, and we have a CF who just started with us.
I'm sorry, what's that stand for?
Oh, it's a clinical fellow. So it's basically like residency for speech pathologists. And we promised her intervention experience, so we're gonna give her some intervention experience this year. So those are the two things that we're really thinking about, like pushing to move forward. So we have a grant under review. We should find out in the next month or so about the embedding vocabulary instruction in book reading for print concepts. So that one we're really excited about. Did I answer all of your questions?
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to
I
be
start
on the mailing
talking and then I
list.
forget what's
So as you guys publish more, I want to be on the mailing list. Or social media or whatever.
We should start. We have a Facebook page. You can follow us on Facebook. It's like at the Ella Study, I think is our Facebook. It's the Ella Study. For some reason they wouldn't let us just do Ella. Taken.
So many named Ella.
Yeah. We also have a general lab Facebook page, so we're the Written Language Lab. And we have a Twitter too. So I should have put all these things up. I can include them.
That'd be great.
Email
Say,
too. And we have Instagram. I'm old.
We're getting texts in that says, can you please share those resources when available? And can you please share the list of books you mentioned?
Yes. Any other questions from anybody online? Anybody in the room? All right. Well, I know it's getting late, but thanks let me move this way so you can see. Thanks everybody for attending. And those of you who are in the room, we've got some snacks, and certainly would love to chat with you some more in a couple minutes. And those of you online, feel free to reach out if you need anything, especially around the CEU credit for the event.
I have a list of the online folks that said they needed a CE.
Thank you.
And some that didn't say anything at all, but we'll just go ahead and send that anyway.
Thank you for facilitating. I appreciate it. And Brittany and Crystal, thank you so much for coming out, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's important work. I appreciate it.
And we should also say we're still recruiting for Ella. So if you know of any 4-year-olds, we have some packets that you can either take for your own child or take for families that you might.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.